that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void and of no effect. This means that the order in council to which it led was also unlawful, void and of no effect and should be quashed. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices.
First of all, I mean, how naive, how stupid do these politicians think we are? The answer is a resounding very.
Keir Starmer is spiralling, and this time there's no soft landing. What began as hushed murmurs has detonated into the biggest political firestorm of the decade. Now the Chief Justice has dropped the hammer, issuing a landmark ruling that's left Starmer's premiership clinging to life. This isn't just a misstep, it's a £22 billion sterling disappearance act. Public funds gone without a trace. No answers, no accountability, just a gaping hole where transparency should have been. The backlash? Swift and unforgiving. King Charles is said to be fuming. MPs are scrambling to save face, and across the UK outrage is boiling over. Citizens are uniting under one demand. Starmer must resign, now.
That inward investment will mean better jobs right across the country. Since we've been in power, we've brought in over £60 billion of investment from around the world. That's a record sum of money, and therefore that for me is vindication that the approach that we're taking to the economy, which is to stabilise it, to be strategic and long-term in our decision making, is the very thing that investors care about most.
Westminster has erupted into chaos. The ruling didn't just rattle the establishment, it blew the doors off. For months, Labour insiders scoffed at the allegations, brushing them off as partisan noise. But now the courts have spoken, and that noise has become deafening sirens. This scandal cuts deeper than mismanagement. It's a betrayal of trust, a failure of power, a government that watched £22 billion sterling vanish. Money meant to heal the sick, educate the young, and keep the country moving. Gone, without explanation, without remorse. In a desperate attempt to deflect the flames, Keir Starmer threw Rachel Reeves under the bus, pushing her to the front lines to deliver what may be the bleakest financial announcement in modern British history. Not aimed at political rivals, but at the British people. Why? Because Starmer is now neck-deep in a full-blown financial standoff with the Royal Treasury and the Office for Budget Responsibility. And instead of facing the fire himself, he handed someone else the match.
It's already worse than the past. The future looks set to be even worse. Now today, Labour Chancellor Rachel Reeves issued her emergency budget, a panic move because she was on the brink of breaking her own fiscal rules. And while she's facing criticism for cutting public services and losing control of the public finances, there is a much bigger picture being missed here. We have 170,000 more civil servants on the payroll than we did in 2016, all of whom, by the way, are being paid for by you, the British taxpayer. Our welfare spending has been going up and is now projected to surpass £360 billion a year by 2028-29.
Britain's economy has taken another punishing blow, but this time it's more than just grim stats and falling graphs. It's the heavy silence of disillusionment, the quiet sting of confusion, a creeping hopelessness settling into everyday life like a chill in the bones. The streets feel colder, drier. This isn't just about money anymore. People aren't just cutting back, they're breaking down. And after today's emergency budget bombshell from the Labour government, that exhaustion has twisted into raw, simmering anger. The economy is flatlining, growth slashed to a miserable 1%, half of what was promised. Inflation's creeping back up, the cost of living through the roof. And since the last budget, more than 230,000 businesses have closed their doors for good. This isn't a slump, it's a collapse. The government blames global instability, but no one's buying it, not anymore. The public sees it clearly now, because the truth is out, and it's uglier than anyone dared imagine. The Chief Justice has pulled back the curtain on a scandal of staggering scale. £22 billion sterling. Gone. Vanished. Money meant to hold this nation together, siphoned off into silence. And now, Britain is asking one brutal, unavoidable question. Who let this happen?
Big net zero, big immigration economy that's making us poorer and pushing us into managed decline. And this isn't just about the economy either. When people are asked who will lower immigration, who will stop the small boats, who will reduce crime, the most popular answer today is not Labour, it's not the Conservatives, it's none of them. There is a widespread feeling among the British people that they are now trapped in a flimsy, disintegrating boat on stormy seas with no captain and surrounded by enormous, terrifying waves. It's a sense that nobody in power really knows what they're doing anymore, that nobody's even bothering to listen to the forgotten majority.
The money that was supposed to breathe life back into the nation, gone. The very funds meant to power hospitals, keep the trains running and support struggling communities have evaporated. And even King Charles is said to be in disbelief at the sheer scale of this financial collapse. This isn't just a policy misfire, it's a national disgrace. A full-blown scandal that's brought Britain to the edge. Public services are falling apart. Train schedules have become a joke. Crime feels unchecked. Hospitals are buckling under impossible strain. Welfare programmes? Slashed to the bone. And yet, somehow, the government's payroll keeps swelling. Since 2016, more than 170,000 new civil servants have been added. While the country sinks, bureaucracy grows. Debt is piling sky high. Annual borrowing has surged beyond £100 billion. By 2029, welfare spending is projected to hit an eye-watering £360 billion. And just paying the interest on our national debt? That now costs over £100 billion a year, making it the fourth largest expense in the entire budget. Meanwhile, families are left choosing between groceries and heating. And as the nation reels, another storm is gathering: immigration. With the economy on the brink, a hard question is echoing louder across the country. Is immigration fueling recovery, or is it pulling the entire system closer to collapse?
All the result of global factors, Donald Trump and Ukraine and so on. But the reality is it was Rachel Reeves at the last budget who increased taxes on businesses through national insurance. It was Labour that went on a big spending spree. A lot of this that we're seeing reflected in the growth figures, that we're seeing reflected in this deteriorating economy, I would argue should land on Rachel Reeves' shoulders. She's kicking a lot of the longer term stuff into the long grass, right? She's not really dealing with what's the strategy for cutting debt? What's the strategy for getting back to good growth rates? What's the strategy for actually driving productivity in the British economy?
Some say the real crisis isn't just economic, it's mental. A national mindset where too many businesses cling to cheap labour, avoiding innovation, dodging investment and dragging Britain's productivity into the mud. Inside Parliament, Labour is scrambling. They're dressing up this budget as a step forward, promising planning reforms, affordable housing and a roadmap to stability. But across the aisle and across the country, few are buying the sales pitch. To most, it stinks of panic. Soaring taxes, out-of-control spending, no long-term vision, and now, thanks to the Chief Justice, a corruption scandal so vast, no amount of spin can bury it. Here's the ugly truth: nothing's working. The economy is frozen, public trust has hit rock bottom, and neither side of the political spectrum has a plan that holds water. Britain is exhausted, and as Keir Starmer's grip on power slips with every passing hour, the nation is holding its breath, waiting for the next blow. Yet somehow, amid all this wreckage, Starmer and Rachel Reeves are out there claiming that Labour has raised the standard of living. Raised it for who? Because if this mess is their idea of progress, then Starmer isn't leading a country. He's living in a fantasy. And the rest of us, we're stuck in his reality.
I was quite struck by the fact that you said Labour is delivering higher living standards for the people of this country. In what way is that happening?
Tensions flared this morning as Chancellor Rachel Reeves went live on GB News. Armed with a stack of statistics, a carefully composed tone, and what felt like a pre-rehearsed defence of Labour's crumbling economic plan, she stepped into the spotlight. But the audience wasn't having it. Reeves insisted that households would eventually feel the benefits, tossing out optimistic projections and savings figures like confetti. But the more she spoke, the more disconnected she seemed. Her tone was flat, her delivery hesitant and riddled with awkward pauses. It felt detached, robotic, and worst of all, completely removed from the brutal day-to-day struggle millions of Britons are living through. And this wasn't a friendly sit-down. When the questions turned to Britain's stalling growth, Reeves defaulted to the oldest trick in the book: blame the past. She pointed fingers at previous governments, global instability, anywhere but Labour's own failures. The response was swift and merciless. Social media lit up with outrage, blasting the interview as nothing more than a deflection parade devoid of accountability or real answers. Reeves tried to pivot, insisting wages are finally beating inflation and that housing reforms are realigning the economy. But to viewers watching at home, it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like noise.
Our forecast yesterday shows that the real household disposable income per person will be £500 greater at the end of the Parliament compared with the plans that I inherited. And obviously the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards, and the OBR confirmed yesterday that real household disposable income will increase in every year of this Parliament. I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. I'm not complacent about the challenges that families face with their finance.
Bills are soaring. Council taxes are biting harder than ever. Food prices? Relentless. So when Rachel Reeves claimed things were getting better, it felt completely unmoored from reality. Then came the centrepiece of her pitch, house building. She doubled down on a bold promise. Labour would push construction to a 40-year high, selling it as the cornerstone of economic recovery. But beyond the podium, things look very different. Builders are overwhelmed, supply chains are wobbling, and small businesses, they're already suffocating under heavy tax burdens, now staring down an even steeper climb, with the new national insurance charge for employers looming large. To many, this doesn't look like progress. It looks like yet another top-down blueprint built on fragile ground, while the crushing weight of everyday economic pressure continues to fall squarely on the shoulders of those with the least.
You're a government going for growth. That has been your clear message, but you stood on your feet yesterday and admitted that the growth forecast had been halved. But it's not your fault. You blamed Liz Truss and her mini-budget, the Conservative inheritance, the changing world and global insecurity. Why do you seem to want to blame everyone and everything but yourself? Do you not take any responsibility for the political decisions that you have made and the consequences of the budget that you laid out in October?
Reeves tried to claw back control, pointing out that small businesses with 4 or fewer staff on the national living wage wouldn't pay national insurance at all. But by that point, the damage was done. Trust had already crumbled. The broader reality hadn't changed. Shops are still shutting down, job ads are vanishing, and economic confidence is plunging off a cliff. Then came her next talking point, the NHS. Reeves claimed waiting lists had fallen for 5 consecutive months, backed by millions of new appointments. But it didn't land. It sounded like a line rehearsed in front of a mirror too many times. Stale, robotic, hollow, because across the UK, the lived experience tells a different story. Patients are still stuck in queues, the backlogs haven't disappeared, the pressure hasn't lifted, and the cracks in the system are only widening while the root problems are swept aside, left to rot beneath the headlines.
That we have already done, and the Office of Budget Responsibility did say yesterday that the planning reforms that we've already brought in will make our economy bigger and will bring in more tax revenue, which is much needed to fund our public services, particularly our NHS, but also to make sure that we've got money for defence, which is obviously so crucial at these challenging times.
Yes, but the entire growth process is going to be built on the housing sector, isn't it? Which is problematic. I mean, it's all your chickens, all your eggs in one basket. At a time when, on the 1st of April, of course, we see this new national insurance for employers rise coming in, which a lot of small businesses say is going to cripple them and certainly stop them hiring new people.
And when the conversation turned global, the fog thickened. What if Trump, now re-emerging as a dominant force in US politics, slaps tariffs on the UK? A move that could instantly shatter Labour's already fragile growth projections. Reeves gave a vague, non-committal answer about intense talks, but the public doesn't want carefully worded diplomacy, they want a plan. In the end, Reeves didn't just fail to calm fears, she confirmed them. She left behind a deeper, more troubling belief that those in charge have no grasp of the chaos everyday people are navigating. And while the Chancellor scrambled to control the fallout, Keir Starmer made a quiet pivot, conveniently downplaying a key part of the Chief Justice's ruling and redirecting attention to controversial foreign dealings. Now, critics are sounding alarms about new trade deals and loan agreements with Ukraine, deals that seem to deliver nothing in return for British taxpayers. So now the question isn't just about competence, it's about intent. Because at this point, more and more people are asking, is Starmer simply clinging to power for power's sake? Because his actions make one thing brutally clear: he's not governing for the people footing the bill.
And therefore the pressure needs to go on to Russia to get more seriously to the negotiating table and to have a framework or a deadline, if you like, for responding to what the Ukrainians have already put on the table and what the US is seeking to achieve in their initiative. So I think there's got to be a framework around that. Obviously we'll discuss that with allies and with the US, but also, and this was a very strong resolve across the room, that now is not the time for pulling back or weakening on sanctions. On the contrary, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia to get them to the table to these negotiations, to the hope of a ceasefire and a lasting and secure ceasefire that preserves the security and sovereignty of.
By the time he stepped away from the podium, the public mood was crystal clear. This wasn't reassurance, it was detachment. A leader speaking of distant wars while his own country bleeds at home. As the government sinks deeper into conflicts oceans away, Britain's domestic crisis only worsens. And more voters are asking the one question Starmer refuses to answer: who is he really fighting for? If you enjoyed this breakdown, please like and subscribe to the channel for more updates like this.